You guys, it is just amazing to me to have Bethany Barnard with us today. Some of you might have known her when she was Bethany Dillon as this young single woman, as a singer-songwriter. Is somewhere along the line, she married this amazing guy, Shane Barnard, from the group Shane and Shane. And so it is just so cool to have her here to share her story with us today. A few weeks ago, I reconnected in my own mind. I have to say that Beth, you weren't on my radar at that particular moment, but two people that I really love and respect who were going through some really difficult times came to me and said, "Have you heard this record, All My Questions?" And I said, I don't. Both of them said, "You have to listen to it. It is," they both said, "I can't even, I cry every time I even pick it up, every time I play it,
Mm.
because the lyrics so accurately reflect where I am that I don't even know what to do with that. And you have to listen to it." So I did. And I have to tell you, it struck me immediately with both the sadness, the hope, the beauty, the way that you took your own life experiences and put it into words that obviously many people can identify with. And I knew that I wanted you to be on a breathe call with our breathe parents. I felt like the way that you share your story about experiencing mental health challenges from childhood and what that was like, I just felt like that a conversation with you would give our parents an opportunity to hear from somebody who is living with mental health challenges, has for a long time. And I think with I'll give you, we'll say hello, and then I'll come back. You can at least say hello.
Hello. Kay, when you reached out, I just was blown away by just the like how encouraging it was and how much I'm spurred on by what you have. And I know your local church and your family, what you all have done and what you continue to do for those who are suffering in whatever way, because that is near and dear to my heart. And so it just feels like just that sweet thing about being a part of the family of God that um, in whatever way that your story ends up turning, that the Lord does connect you with those who have like minds or um, wounds and scars, but the ways that he shows up for us, that we get to share that. I mean, so anyway, I was blown away when you DM'd me on Instagram. I was like, this is so cool. I'm so excited to get to talk to her.
Yeah, it was. I think we were both. Then we talked while you were in your car, and I'm sitting at work, and it was like we're just old buddies, just chatting about life, and it was just like I just talked to Bethany Bernard. This is, my daughter, who has been a fan since she was a young mom. It was just like jealous. In fact, today she said, "You have to tell her hello for me." And that I loved and admired her for so many years. So there's so many people who feel like that. But the reason I was starting to say that I wanted to invite you on this call, in particular, was because it's a ministry to parents who have children with mental health struggles. And sometimes we get so caught up as parents in our own family's life and our own family's drama, trauma, wounds, heartaches, that we sometimes just need to step back and say, okay, what's it like to be a child growing up with, mental health struggles? Because we all we can hear is our own story, and sometimes we can't receive some things we might need to hear, but nobody has an emotional tie to you. You're not their family. And so hopefully all the parents on this call can hear both the positive and maybe the things that you wish had been a little bit different, maybe in your church or in your family or whatever. I just think it will be so encouraging and hopeful for them, because your life isn't perfect. You don't your story, your witness of life is not that everything is now great and all of this is behind you, but you have such a hopeful story, and I think the parents who listen are gonna gain a lot. So, I want to just give you a chance. I did a really quick overview of what I know about you, but just take a little bit of time and tell us about, more about yourself, you're growing up, and then I'll ask you some more specific questions.
Yeah, sure. I before the Bethany Dillon thing happened, I mean, I grew up in rural Ohio to middle class working parents who love the Lord. My dad is now with the Lord, but I grew up in a pretty blue collar, uh, moral, close knit family. We never bought name brand things, and my parents were social workers, and they were also foster parents. So there just was a lot of like activity always in our home, that was very formative for all of us, and not perfect but formative. Um, so I'm one of three biological children, but I'm one of seven children. I have four brothers through adoption, and I guess the something that is worth mentioning always, but especially as it relates to mental health for me. I mean, the Lord really gripped my heart at a young age. I look back now, and now I'm a mom, and I have four daughters, but I have a daughter who is 9 right now, and that was the age when I'd always had like an awareness and a belief, I think, or it's soft heart. And so I don't have a story of some drastic, dramatic thing. Kind of that gradual story of like, man, I remember having a soft heart towards him. And then there was an age when it really became like, no, I'm going to read my Bible. I want to learn what praying looks like. And it's significant in all the ways that you already know, but it's significant because once I was diagnosed at 30 with the mental health issues that I have, one being OCD, I started to learn about it. And then I looked back at my childhood and my adolescence and my 20s, and I was like, this makes so much sense. Oh my gosh, even if it took a while for my family, my parents and my siblings even to go, you have OCD? No, no. And just as I was learning and as they saw the change in me. But I say, the Lord got my heart, and I'm so grateful for that. And I think that some of the struggles that I have and that I severely had to do with spirituality, had to do with Christianity too, of fearfulness. It's called scrupulosity in the DSM. Um, so that was kind of I guess that was like the setting of childhood, what I valued, how God saved me. And then songs started to happen. And it was not a thing that my parents pursued for me. It was a very passive on our part, kind of in a similar way that you heard about my record, All My Questions. That was kind of how that all came about. I was singing special music at, churches of Christ and Baptist churches in Logan County, Ohio. So it wasn't at all. Anyway, so then that was for a span of years. And then, yes, I got married at 19 to Shane, which is a story in itself. And then 2 years later, started having kids and stopped doing music, touring and being a signed artist. And then, even though I had issues that I now know I had, everything was really functional until it wasn't, and until we all have trauma, and there were things that were super hard before I turned 30. But when I turned 30, my dad died, and a couple other like little avalanche sites happened that caused me to go get diagnosed.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing. When you use that term, I was doing special music. I too grew up in church, and I was the church pianist at like age 11.
Okay.
And not that I was that great, it's just the need was that great
Yep, yep.
in the small churches, but just the idea of special music, and yeah. anyway, I
Um,
could really relate with that. But so when did you first notice? You said that you were diagnosed at 30, but you also said looking back, you could things maybe fell into place. So maybe when was the youngest that you can remember thinking, oh, even as you look back, oh, that's probably what was happening to me, even though I didn't know what it was.
um, Scrupulosity is probably the first thing I recognized. I had um, a very sensitive conscience. And so, and I was, so in birth order world, I was the baby of my family, but then I became the oldest of adopteds and foster children. And then I'm the middle. And my personality was not super chaotic or dramatic. And so there was kind of my like externals, but even internally, like I just was a pleaser, really close with my mom, helpful, homeschooled, and I just apologized so much,
Mm.
even just for thoughts I had or like a bad attitude that I had toward my mom, that she would be confused, like, Beth, I didn't even,
Yeah.
what are you talking about, honey? Um, and so I think that was probably present before, age 9 when I really started to walk with Jesus. But like even just in strange things that I thought truly were like a test of my character, like if the toilet paper roll was out, because there were so many people in my house and it was out, like I used the last bit. And if I wouldn't change it, I thought, gosh, I'm a
What a
selfish.
terrible person you are.
I'm not helping my
Yeah.
mom, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that sticks out because it stuck out. Like
Yeah.
I share that for that reason. So it was things like that. And then when I started to, you know, practice like spiritual disciplines, oh my goodness, I was beside myself. I think back to times that, I would spend hours into the night as a little girl crying and weeping in my room, into my carpet, terrified that I didn't really love God. I couldn't really hear God, that God was mad at me. Um, like memories of things that I did as a child that are normal to a childhood experience would come back to shame me. And I would just be in throes of, and we at the time actually were at a more charismatic church, which isn't, I mean, there's so much good that the Lord did, but I think the hyper vigilance of like holiness and waiting on the Lord until you get something, until you get a word, like those things that actually aren't biblical, like in the sense of I keep myself and I keep myself holy and I got to clean the room up every day and all of that was really influential for me. And so I think back to what quiet times looked like, and quiet times looked like a psych ward for the soul. But I think because I was like not some going off the deep end, rebellious child, preteen, teen, and it was about something spiritual and it was about something that, like, man, I want to be good. I think that it flew under the radar and even was just like, man, Beth, that's just how Beth is. And
Were
songs
you
come out of
sorry,
it.
keep
No,
going. Oh, so yeah. No, go ahead.
I just mean that there were good things that came out of it, right? So it's like this can't be the sign or symptom. And I don't even fault, goodness, I don't fault my parents whatsoever. It just I now know what that was, the panic.
I having grown up similarly, although not in charismatic churches, but in very legalistic um, Baptist churches where there was such a focus on confession of sin, where there was such a focus on, yeah, being holy, doing everything right. Um, I can identify to some degree with that. But so it sounds like also because you weren't getting into trouble or you weren't like doing anything really, really alarming, that you were probably seen as just this very super spiritual person. Yeah. Like the kind that everybody else should aspire to because you were so good.
Yeah. And the thing is that I there are things about the way God wired me that I am a deep feeler, and I am there are things that as I've gotten better, that hasn't gone away about me. It's the difference between, I mean, it is physiological versus the spiritual. And I know God saw me as a little girl, and that's been a really healing journey of like, when I first started to do therapy for my OCD and do like the treatment plan, and scrupulosity was for sure a big part of that. Um, that was a process that it wasn't just like something that I like, oh, I'm going to intellectually agree with that and now I move on. Like there was an unraveling and processing of, the Lord saw me in that, and I don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Totally. Like, oh my gosh, have I been a Christian? What about those really important moments I had with God? And I can now see there was a lot of anxiety in it, but like, was that all fake? Was that all? It's a really hard, it's hard to describe, but I have met with multiple people since getting diagnosed who you start to share and they're like, oh, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. And they go on to get diagnosed. And so I think just the learning the difference between like the work of the spirit and what conviction of sin looks like versus the heaviness of anxiety
Yeah.
and scruples, like scrupulosity of, I loved Martin Luther so much since I was a teenager, and I so related to him, and a movie came out about him. I so get him that he before he read Galatians for himself, he's in the confessional for hours a day, wearing out the priest, and then he walks back to his quarters and realizes he's prideful that he confessed for that long. So he comes back. And I related to that, and it felt good to see myself. But now on this side, I look at that and go, yeah, but that's not freedom in Christ.
No, that's not healthy.
That was my brain.
Yeah.
That was my brain on
Yeah.
fire and
Yeah.
physiologically affecting me.
Yeah.
And I can have grace for myself in that now. And I
Yeah.
don't have to go back. But it's real hard to detect if you are in a legalistic
Hmm.
culture. If
Hmm.
you've grown up in the church,
Hmm.
it's really hard. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, there were several things that I wrote down. You were, and I think some of it boils down to. Oh, I know you were talking about your personality. Even now, you can look at your personality, and some of those traits or tendencies haven't gone away, but they're not troublesome because they're not excessive, like where you have a context for them, you know where to put some of them. And it's also the benefit of the way that you're shaped and made. And I was thinking just the difference between healthy and unhealthy. So those parts of you that were so excessive in all of that was the unhealthy part. But now you, as you have learned and grown, and therapy, and you have a context to put all this in, those things are there and are now healthy parts of you, that are beautiful, and that God doesn't wipe out our personality, even with it there. Our personality is part of our mental health, and there are parts of it that are unhealthy and parts of it that don't go away, but they become healthy. And that's really encouraging, I think, to see, even for parents who have kids or even adult kids who don't necessarily either recognize that what they have is OCD or the anxiety in it. And there can be this, parents can just kind of lose hope that any of that could ever change and become a part of a very healthy individual. And you're kind of living proof that that is possible, with good therapy, good treatment, good recognition of what's going on in your brain. Something else you said, we recently had a psychiatrist who specializes in anxiety at one of our events, and he said, and I did not know this, but he said it takes 7 years. It's the typically 7 years for someone to get a diagnosis of OCD, and then maybe another 7 years before they either seek treatment or they go after it, in such a concentrated way that it makes a difference for them. And that blew my mind.
Wow.
And I asked him, it feels like OCD, at least some of the expressions of OCD are so obvious that how could it take 7 years, for someone to get a diagnosis? And he said, well, it's because sometimes it's actually much more subtle. He gave me the example of like a teenager who keeps like touching their face, or, it's just kind of, and we might think, oh, they're just concerned because they're a teenager and they've got some acne or whatever. But he said, for some kids, that constant repetitious touching or is masking OCD. And he just gave lots of different examples of how OCD can mask.
Yes.
And it sounds like you were one of those people, not intentionally, of course, and nobody even knew, but it was being masked and undetected, partially because of the environment you were growing up in. But how did it feel? What did it feel like to get a diagnosis at 30? You've said you could look back and see some things made sense, but did you struggle with the diagnosis? Did you push it away at first? Did you what was your sense of that?
Mhm. It was so mixed because I had been in therapy. Again, deep feeler, deep thinker, had other stuff I wanted to process, and so throughout my 20s, I went to therapy without being diagnosed or any flags. And so, and I was going kind of for this just intangible thing that just wouldn't go away, you know? Talk therapy would kind of help, but it never really went away. And so when I got,
Can I interrupt you and ask, was it just seen as just straight anxiety? Like, just was it labeled anxiety at that point? Or
it
did it even have a label?
it was really, and I don't even lay like faults on any provider, but it was more just looked at as a spiritual depression,
Oh, oh,
which there is such a huge difference between
yeah,
a biblical counselor
yeah.
and a clinician. And I've learned that through diagnosis, but I would just say, like, my therapist before diagnosis referred me on, said, I'm starting to see things, but I'm
Mm,
not qualified and I have a colleague.
mm,
And so that first phone call with my therapist, my new therapist, was so strange because she was finishing my sentences and I felt like, what? Like she was reading her mail. Um, and there was this relief because I thought, this is the thing. This might be the thing that has plagued me. My 20s were so hard. Um, Hopefulness and relief. And then it's like a tide that like came in and then like it went out and there was all of this shame
mm,
and this like sadness, just grief
yeah,
over I'm not well.
yeah,
And there's a road ahead of work
mm,
that I gotta do. I gotta show up for. And I hear you
mm,
say post diagnosis, it takes people 7 years. I'm like, I so get that. I think there's something in me, and I think, my season of life, it's like I had a baby and I had three kids older than the baby. And I think there was this urgency of like, I need to be okay and I'm not okay. That lit a fire under me. But
mm,
I didn't tell many people I had OCD for a while. And so it was a process,
yeah,
of feeling like, are people going to look at me differently?
yeah,
Do I have to explain something that I don't understand? um, and just scared of the unknown ahead of, what's this going to look like? How long is it going to take?
yeah.
Um, And my therapist was really very honest and blunt and like, it might get worse before it gets better.
Mm.
I thought, great. You know? So that's what diagnosis felt like for me.
Yeah.
Pretty confusing.
Yeah, confusing, but I also hear at least a tiny bit of relief of you as you had lived your own life made a little more sense to yourself. Maybe if I'm putting words in your mouth, but what I hear you saying is you made a little more sense to yourself.
Yeah,
You had some context for what had happened, what the way you were living your life, the way you were living out your faith, the way that you understood it. There was had to be a tiny bit of relief, but I can also see and hear how overwhelming it must have felt to, how tall is this mountain that I have to climb,
exactly.
you know?
And when I just to add to that, um, a lot of my kind of like the guests that you had previously talking about, there's a lot of subtle. My therapist called OCD people who have OCD the silent sufferers
Mm,
because it is mostly internal. It is, I mean, the things that you see are the compulsion side. The
yeah,
obsession side is
yes,
internal,
yeah,
and my bents were more towards the obsessional. So there was a lot of loneliness that
mm,
I didn't know was there.
mm,
That as things were making sense to me and I was putting them in different categories or challenging them in therapy, like it strangely felt like, there's just this room that the lights off and it smells like nobody's been in there for a bit and it's just like
mm,
on and you're like, oh my gosh, I have felt this way and thought this way for so long. And if I
wow,
try to explain it to my nearest and dearest, they they have a hard time believing that
yeah,
that's really what's been going on in me.
wow.
Yeah, it was
For
really hard.
for parents on the call whose child doesn't have OCD and they might have other diagnoses, just give you mentioned the two words that go together for OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and you differentiated between obsessions and compulsions. So maybe for parents who aren't quite as familiar with OCD, would you just unpack that a little bit as you understand it, what the difference is, and I think you pointed out something really critical is for you, well, I'll let you talk, but for you, it sounds like the compulsions weren't as prominent as the obsessions. The compulsions are easier to spot, I
Mhm.
think, than obsessions. So anyway, just unpack that as you understand it for some of our parents.
Yeah. The cycle, I mean, you can Google it and see different images that are really helpful, but it's the cycle starts with a trigger. So the trigger is not the obsession, but the trigger for me, you know, going to read my Bible or reading my Bible could be a trigger. The obsession is kind of synonymous with a doubt, or it's just a washing machine, right? Of do I really love God? Am I reading long enough? Am I reading the right book? Like, did I pay attention to that? Um, am I studying right? Oh my gosh, I forgot to journal. Oh, the kids just woke up. When am I going to fit in? Because I didn't do 30 minutes. So there's an obsession of doubts, lots of questions, shoulds, uncertainty, all of that the trigger kind of initiates. And the obsessions become so distressing that there's a compulsion that follows to neutralize the distress. So it could be finishing the planned on amount of time in the Bible is compulsive, or getting up earlier the next day is compulsive. It's a compulsion to neutralize that distress, anxiety, and doubt. And it helps a little. It's like, it's not, compulsions aren't silly, they're usually rational. They can grow, but I think for the average sufferer, it's not something you see in the movies or you imagine. It's, again, it flies under the radar for a reason. So whatever the compulsion is happens, and it feeds the OCD in your brain a little bit of candy, and it quiets down, and then the cycle goes, it closes, but the next time that trigger happens, it's louder, stronger. I mean, those are neural pathways that are being reinforced, reinforced, reinforced. And so as you feel this fire alarm go off in your body or just in your thought life, the more you believe it and answer it and rush to its aid, it's just reinforcing that loop. So that's OCD as I understand it and how mine
It
works.
feel and I think that was really clear. I think it's super helpful. And there might even be some parents who recognize those tendencies in their children that they didn't necessarily recognize were OCD. So I think for some people, like maybe have just gone on, and other people whose kid lives with OCD is like nodding their head very vigorously because that's what that's what they see, that's what they're used to. Our son Matthew also had OCD as one of his many struggles, and it kind of would wax and wane as part of either that was the predominant way that was the predominant thing he was struggling with. Other times it was it could have been the major depression. I mean, but there was a period I remember when he was in high school, after he had gotten his driver's license, and he also had the scrupulosity and really connected with his walk with God. And he would, I just remember one night he was just, well, I'll tell you the driving story first, but if the speed limit was 40, he would drive 38 because there was no way he was going to hit 40 because that was illegal. And so we would try to say, Bud, there's a little bit of grace built into the legal system. Generally, you can go a little under and not be going too slow and be pulled over, and you can go a little bit over and not be pulled over for going too fast. The system accommodates a little bit of variance. And at the time I didn't understand how that wasn't just not helpful, because I was trying to apply just straight logic to a situation that for him was not responding to, that didn't comfort him. It didn't change anything. He didn't feel he was not more likely to go 41 or even 40, because that would have just been, still in his mind, that would have been breaking the law, and he was not going to break the law. But I do remember, as it related to his relationship with the Lord, a couple times when he was in freshman year of college or whatever, and he would go to his college ministry, a small group, and they, during the prayer request time, people would give their prayer requests, and he wrote them all down. But the time that sticks out in my mind so painfully is when he was weeping with despair that he could not keep up with the prayer requests. So as he explained it to me, that he had pages of prayer requests. So if somebody mentioned a prayer request 3 months ago, he's still praying for that request, even if that person hasn't mentioned it in a while, because they did mention it and he wrote it down. He had to go through, and he literally could not bear the weight of his faith. It was too much. And I do believe it is part of what, when he died angry at God. He did not get the OCD help that he needed. I wish that we had understood what he needed. He didn't need talk therapy. He didn't need logic from us. He needed specific OCD. He did go to a 6-week training, but it didn't budge things for him. I wish we had focused more, but part of his anger at God was just not being able to bear the weight of the rules, the regulation, the self-imposed. They were self-imposed, like having to pray for everybody who had ever asked for prayer. Well, nobody expects that, but that was the weight he was carrying. And so even when I heard part of your story, I mean, my heart just aches with the pain and the struggle of trying to bear the weight of your faith, when it feels like God's demands are absolutely unmeetable. You could never meet all of God's demands in that way of thinking. So how has that shifted for you, Bethany? How has that shifted as you've from diagnosis, you very specific treatment. Where has that taken you today?
In medicine.
Mm.
Therapy and medicine. Um, that has, I mean, when, as it, oh gosh, it doesn't feel like there's enough time to share about the ways that God has just changed my changed my thinking and freed me from so many things that my therapist at the onset was like, stick with me, stick with me. This is a proven process. God uses it. Come on. And I'm like, I don't know if you, but you don't know me. You
Yeah.
don't know how bad it is.
Yeah.
And she was right. And my husband has a song that's basically it's verbatim Psalm 34. And
I love that song.
uh, anytime he leads it, and it says, "This poor man cried, and the Lord heard me and saved me from my enemies." I mean, I could be in like a spiritual desert and I still need to raise my hand and go, this poor man cried and the Lord heard me. And it wasn't immediate. I can remember multiple times when I had my mental breakdown at 30 of crying into my carpet, just like when I was 10, and wailing and mad at God and saying, it's got to give. Please let there be a give. I feel like I'm failing as a mom. Let me out, you know. And it didn't just like change like that, but I remember on a walk during that time, I think it was after I started therapy, but I remember a walk around our park here and just wrestling and more thinking than praying, but like God's bigger than all my rules of like, dear Lord, please help me. I'm really angry with you. Why are you saying yes to this? But I was just processing, and I really clearly heard the Lord say, I want you to know me in a special way. And I'm like, it wasn't, it's kind of like how Job asked so many questions and God didn't really answer that question, but God did answer. And it felt like the Lord didn't say, here's when you're going to feel lots better, or yes, I'll remove OCD and depression completely. It was, it at the same time was like so affirming of his love, deep, 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 deep in me, like beyond what I can convince myself of. And so that really was like some manna for me of like, um, man, and the Lord opened up like relationship with neighbors in our cul-de-sac who aren't Christians that we're intentional with and get to know and love and all of that. And I'm like at my lowest, Kay, like barely getting out of the house and splotchy face all the time and whatever. I feel like I'm like wearing this sign, I'm losing my mind. And in sharing, just eventually making the choice to just share about that in conversation or just how we're doing or in whatever way I had an opportunity, it was like such an open door. It's like our weakness and our sufferings, just there's no way to fully comprehend how God shows who he is through that. And then I know I'm going long, but I just would say with this
No.
curiosity too of like how enslaving that was and my imposed rules and my fear, that I didn't really love God. He didn't really love me. There was something wrong. I can't quite find it. But when I do, God, I promise I'll get rid of it. That whole thing. Um, Therapy for scrupulosity was for a time ceasing from spiritual disciplines
Yeah.
entirely. And that made me want to vomit. And I
Yeah.
didn't tell people. I was ashamed of it. I was terrified. I pushed back with my therapist, all of that.
Yeah.
And that is one of my favorite memories in my faith journey is when I ceased from doing because I was prescribed it. And then it's like, wait, like the Holy Spirit, the person of the Spirit, is like bringing to mind these things that I know are true, but I'm like, all right, in him, I live, move, and have my being. I'm saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And I can lose my mind. I don't have to hold on to anything. Jesus promises, I'm the good shepherd. Every one that the Father gives to me, every sheep, even my OCD sheep, I'm not going to lose one of them.
Yeah.
Like those things became so real because I really, really needed them. I was really scared. And the Lord applied it. He applied that salve to my heart and to my life. And I can't go back now.
Yeah.
And so, there's my there's my long answer of I don't love OCD or depression, and I do have days or weeks that are really, really hard. But it does make me passionate as an advocate for people who need to go get diagnosed and have treatment. And it does make me passionate to share about like when God says no, I don't know why. I'm not going to presume to know why, but I'll tell you what that meant for me. And it's really just his work. And I'm like functioning and healing.
I wish we were in the same room because I just want to give you a really big hug. Just want to hug you and cry with you and laugh with you. And this mental health journey is a really stinky one. It's hard. It's hard. And it's hard to watch our children struggle and suffer, and you've represented so well what some of the parents on this call are living. They have children that they love so dearly who are walking the road that you've walked. And but you're such a hopeful beacon of hope to them. Like we said at the beginning, not perfect, and you said again, not perfect. OCD has not like gone away. It's not magically disappeared, but you have your life back. You are growing in health spiritually and emotionally and mentally, and that's really all any of us can ask for in life. And your story is, and God is with me. I really encourage, the parents to, we'll put it in the notes to get all my questions. You've heard, Bethany tell it, but to actually see then her lyric, what she has said encapsulated in her lyrics and her music, I think you and your loved one with OCD and depression will just resonate and feel understood and seen and cared for and hopeful as well. So thank you so much. I didn't ask you this ahead of time, but would you mind just praying for the parents who are loving children with OCD today?
Yes, thank you. I'd love to. Oh, Father, you are the one who initiates our rescue. And so I just pray Psalm 34 as I have my memories of that's who you are, that I cried out to you and you answered me. I pray for those who are just in a place of weariness or despair or loneliness in fighting this battle, waiting for the right diagnosis or waiting for the treatment to help. And Lord, just as a mom, I cry out to you with them for their children. And we just ask, Lord, please turn your face towards them. Please, we know that you hear and you see, but we just ask for the experience of that. We ask for relief and healing. And through our sufferings and through these families' sufferings, that it would just be a megaphone to a dying world. And so we just ask, Lord, for your comfort right now through your Spirit. We ask, Lord, for practical steps or ideas that you have brought to mind We ask for the right helps and providers, and for rest as there is work in this. We ask it because you're able to do everything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for being with us.
Right.
And I can't wait to meet you in person. And it will be a really sweet time. Thank you for your time today.